Hi, my name is Pamela Britton, and I'm a PhD candidate at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. I am here once again representing the Canadian Journal of Science, Mathematics and Technology Education. The CJSMTE is one of the leading international journals in the fields of science, mathematics, and technology education, and strives to offer high-quality, peer-reviewed articles covering a variety of topics in the STEM education fields. I'm pleased to be joined here today by Dr. Wolf Michael Roth from the University of Victoria in British Columbia, where he is the Lansdowne Endowed Chair and spends most of his time being able to do research. Dr. Roth joins me today to speak about his article, Looking Back and Looking Forward, a historical perspective on science, mathematics, and technology education in Canada through a personal lens. Thank you so much, Dr. Roth, for joining me today.
Hello.
So you were actually invited to write this article for a special issue of the CJSMTE due to your long history with the journal. Can you tell me a little bit about how you came to be involved with the journal initially?
I'm not sure I recall exactly the details, but the then editor must have contacted me to participate in the editorial process. I do vaguely recall that either U of T Press or some company asked me about my opinion about a journal based in Canada for Science Education. And I vaguely recall that I was a little bit skeptical of what a more local journal in science and math education could contribute to the field. But I think over the years, I became convinced that there was a place and that in fact, there have been some great articles on issues that have been published over the years. And some of these I make reference to in the journal. And in particular, I like what happened despite my original or pre-journal reticence about having yet another journal or so, I thought, was the fact that Hodson and the subsequent editors found a way of organizing special issues that address the field critically or reflectively.
Wonderful. So this journal just turned 20 years old. Have you been involved right from the very beginning?
I think I was involved right from the beginning, and my first article was also, I was invited to react to a critical piece that was published in 2002. And so I must have been asked to write a response to this critical piece already in 2001, and that's the first year of the existence of the journal. So I was, as an author, I was involved from the very beginning, and I was on the editorial board from the very beginning.
Wonderful. And do you happen to recall over the years how many articles you've written, and are there any that really stand out to you that you remember?
I have written so much that I don't recall all the details. I think I had published 6 articles overall, including this one. And I guess they were very critical. There was one that stands out in particular because not only was it published, it was on activism as a way of looking at science education. And the article was published probably 2010, and I subsequently received an award for its social engagement, because I made an argument about using activism as a way of thinking of how we want to organize science education. This one was in particular about science education, how we want to organize it. So rather than sort of separating kids and putting them in a classroom and making them learn certain concepts or do some routine exercises, my idea had been of involving them in some critical activities, such as environmentalist activities. And I wasn't just writing and theorizing it. That theory is actually based on my own experiences, because although I had taught until 1992 before taking up my position at my first position at Simon Fraser, I continued teaching in elementary and middle schools, and for 3 to 5 months periods, testing out how we might want to teach science in ways that differ from the classical approaches. And because I was a researcher, I also had a research team that assisted me in videotaping what was happening in the classrooms that I was teaching. And one of those was experiments was teaching an environmental unit outside with the local teachers. And what we would take, we had environmentalists come into the classroom and then go with the kids out into, for example, a creek, and have the kids do the kind of work, not just research, but the kind of work that they found most interesting. And so this article about activism as a way of thinking about science education was about that particular approach to change how we conceive of science education. And then, of course, there was another one that was probably challenging to some. It was about 2015, where I said, where I write and argue that the schooling is the problem. Because way since just after I had left a private school outside Toronto teaching in innovative ways, I felt that the traditional school, where teachers and schools and parents focus on grades, takes away from getting people really to learn science or math or technology and engineering and whatnot. Because as soon as you focus on grades, that's all the focus. No matter how you get a good grade, that's all that matters, and not that you actually come to develop a knowing how to do something. Whereas you already see the difference when you take kids and have them engage with the environment and within the context of an environmentalist movement, then they actually have a purpose for acquiring something that they need in order to make better arguments, in order to create better data. And so this was sort of my different approach, and that also shows up in the article that you addressed earlier on, because I have all of these experiences of doing teaching in non-traditional ways ever since I started teaching, and then continued to teach in experimental ways. Once I had taken on my position, including this one, focusing just on research, that sort of shaped my thinking about science education in different ways than it might be for a more regular faculty members concerned with, how do I get the next lot of teachers through some methods course.
Excellent. Yeah, and you hit on a lot of points actually from this article specifically, because in the article you state you've been doing this kind of teaching and research for over 40 years now. And this article specifically is a bit of a personal reflection on that, kind of what you've seen, what you've learned. You talk about the stand and deliver format, and how, you know, schools need to innovate, and we're still kind of working in a kind of in an older way within our schools, and that there's different ways to approach the STEM subjects. So if there was kind of one takeaway, because your article looks at both looking back, like how have things kind of historically been done, but also an idea of looking forward. How can we do this differently? How can we approach education differently? And you're talking about innovative schools and that type of thing. Are there any anecdotes or experiences, either from the article or from outside, that you feel are kind of very important to take away? Like if there was one kind of that you would want people to see education and evaluate it as, what would it be?
You know, the one big thing, and it is addressed in the end of the article, that I feel that we need to look at students in a different way. They're not machines that take up the knowledge and put it in their heads, but they're real people with real life concerns, and they continue to live. And we need to conceptualize the people as what they are, namely living and taking up and breathing not only air, but also ways of knowing and ways of doing. And they're more concerned about knowing how to do something. And once we engage, once we allow people to really give themselves to the activity, not just absorbing or manipulating other people and other things, but really getting absorbed into an activity, then we have achieved everything that we need for people to learn. And I have always argued that. You walk down my street here, and it's traditionally a working class neighborhood, and you talk to the people. Science and math are absolutely not required in their life to live in houses that nowadays are in over $1 million. So these people have been doing well. They have been foreman or seamstress, carpenters, working in the shipyards. These have been doing, these people have been doing well, but if you ask them what they know about math or science, they will say, I don't know anything, or very little. And yet they have been very successful. And I think we need to look at science and math education through the lives of these people. And they will know math and science if there's a need for it in the context of their own interests. So right now we have new neighbors, and the son is about 14 years old. And he and his friends are constructing all sorts of things for skating. These obstacles and things that they can do on the skateboard with. And they're so great. And they're not losing any interest. They continuously do that. If we can import that into, and that's what I mean with looking at the world through the students' and teachers' eyes, but mostly through the students' eyes. And if there's something interesting, then they will take it, they will look for it, they will acquire the knowing how. And I think that's the most, or the least addressed issue in STEM education, and our governments are the first to blame for why kids are not only do learn. Okay, I don't want to say nothing, but they learn less than one might imagine, but that they don't really have the interest of pursuing careers in STEM. And that's where I think we need to do more. And thinking about people in terms of their lives, thinking in terms of our continuous development is what I'm doing at the end of the article, to provide a framework for what we might, how we might want to rethink STEM education.
Wonderful, really making it more applicable to real life, and of course, where the future is going is innovation and STEM and all that type. So
it's not just applicable, but it's always applied. That people learn and use it while doing something that is useful. And so it sticks with them like it sticks with you once you have learned to ride a bicycle, or once you have learned a car. You're never losing it. But right now, if you're asked to memorize something, and then you're asked again 20 days, or even tomorrow, then most people will have forgotten what you asked them to memorize. And that's what schooling nowadays is doing. I mean, it has changed in my lifetime, or also because my parents had moved back from Canada to Germany, where they had immigrated from. So I went through a German school system, and we were tested in the university every 2 years on everything, in every exam, on everything that we had done before. So you could not memorize, you could not get ready for the exams, for these oral exams, just by memorizing something overnight. That was impossible, because you had to really know. And the professor in physics could ask you something in mathematics or in electronics, and a professor in chemistry could ask you about the mathematics. So there was no way that you could get ready for these 4 exams that you had every 2 years by just memorizing a little bit. And because you come to internalize it so much, you know it for life, and you know to learn for life. And that's what we don't do right now, I think. Well, that's my observation in schools. We don't do that.
excellent. So yeah, so very cross-curricular, very real life applied. Just kind of as a final question, just briefly, do you think, because you've seen it kind of over the past 40 years, do you think that the school system is moving in the right direction and we're moving towards more of that? Or do you think we still have a long way to go?
I think we have a long way to go. There are attempts here and there in different countries, even in Canada. For example, in our region here, there's a school on one of the islands off. Vancouver Island is surrounded by many small islands here in front of my house. In fact, they're called Gulf Islands. And they have an experimental school because the principal of the school wants it to be like that. And so they open up schooling. They have experiments all over the world where schools, where kids decide what the curriculum is, what they want to do today. And it reminds me of my own ways of teaching 40 years ago, when we had, where the students wrote up a contract every 2 weeks or so. They said, this and this and this we will have achieved at the end of 2 weeks. But I never checked up on them whether they wanted to do something today. You asked me about, one anecdote. There's one anecdote that I've been telling over and over in the course of my career. It's the one about a boy in 8th grade. And he came to me on Monday and said, "Sir, I don't want to do math today." And I said, "What do you want to do?" And he said, "I want to read a novel." I said, "Go ahead." Tuesday, same. sir, I don't want to do math today. What do you want to do? Continue my novel. We did that, and come Friday, on a Friday, after the lesson, he came to me and says, sir, I think I'm behind my group, because they were organized into groups, each of which decided how fast they could go. And he said, you know, I'll be caught up in 3 weeks. He was not only caught up in 3 weeks, he was caught up in 2 weeks and was ahead of his peers. At the end of the school year, he came back to me and said, sir, I love mathematics. I said, so why? What was it? He said, I knew that I could do mathematics whenever I wanted. And if I didn't want to do mathematics, I didn't have to. And because I knew that throughout the school year. And because of that, I love mathematics. And I think if there's one lesson, it is this one that I sort of have, that sort of stands out for me. It tells me something about how we might want to organize schools to have, so that students really do what they want to do and when they want to do it, but also bring them along in the various subject areas: math, science, technology, education. There are other stories that I could tell, but this one was the first one and perhaps the most outstanding one.
Wonderful. Well, you've definitely given us a lot to think about. I want to thank you so much for your time today. Should you wish to read Dr. Roth's article, I highly encourage you to do so, either his most recent one on the looking back and looking forward, or any of the other articles that he's written for the journal over the past 20 years. You can find the journal online at springer.com/42330. And once again, thank you so much, Dr. Roth, for your time. I'm Pamela Britton, and from everyone here at the Canadian Journal of Science, Mathematics, and Technology Education, thank you for joining us today. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter at CJSMTE.